Crystal Charter, Daughter of the Red Seal. Read and written by Rebecca Sewell. Chapter 12. They wandered back the way they came, through tall trees that sheltered from the blinding midday sun. When they spotted a place to sit, Maebe perched her pack against a fallen tree to rummage through it. She scooped out fresh bread and smoked beam salmon, neatly wrapped in brown paper, the illuminated strings in its body still flashing. Mouse's stomach rumbled again at the food Maebe produced. She pulled her dagger from its sheath at the base of her spine and carved off a big chunk of bread to throw at him, before sliding onto a smooth rock to sit down. Such powerful gems used in fancy heirlooms, and I've only ever seen you use them on food. Have they ever even drawn blood? He mocked her. I could draw your blood, tosser. She flashed the dagger in a menacing grimace. Away from civilization for a few hours, and the lady act has already vanished, he laughed before tucking into the bread with intensity. Maebe nibbled at the wrapped fish, savouring the dainty flavour and the smoked finish. She held the flitter with one hand to stop it from flying off, careful of its fluttering metal wings. They sat in silence, tearing off pieces of bread and picking at the beam salmon, the grilled smell wafting around them, making their tongues water in the way that only crystal cooking could. Branches snapped in the distance. A thudding sound vibrated all along the ground, shaking them. They stared at each other, Mouse swallowing a mouthful of food and drawing the short sword he kept at his side. Maebe sheathed her dagger behind her back so she could tie her pack back up as quietly as possible, holding the furiously fighting flitter in her mouth. Heavy grunts echoed through the trees, and from a small gap in the branches, a nose snuffling into the moss of the forest floor, they saw a boar. No ordinary boar. A jumboar from the depths of Artio Forest was rummaging for food only a stone's throw from where they had stopped. It was large enough for 3 men to mount, if they were foolish enough to sit on its ridged spine. A giant snout pressed into the ground, sniffing along the path they had followed. Both of them froze. No threatening creature would venture so close to the city during the day. Hunting cats lived deeper in the mountains, and had been known to snatch songgoats at night. But this boar was not a creature that had been raised here. It noticed them despite their stillness. Beady eyes locked onto their shapes, and it made a squealing sound of hungry delight that rattled their bones. "Run!" Mouse yelled, yanking Maebe's arm so she spun to face the same direction as him. They sprinted over the forest debris, the boar crashing through it behind them. Maebe was faster than Mouse, her long legs spurred on by the desire not to be trampled and eaten. Mouse weaved behind trees, darting side to side enough to make the creature crash into trunks and branches, but not enough to stop it. Maebe skidded to a halt at the overgrown drop they had turned from before. Mouse appeared from behind another tree and ran into her. Both went over the edge and crashed through the underbrush. Falling and rolling down the steep hill, Maebe gashed her hands and her cloak tangled in a briar. Mouse's blade slipped from his hand, but he grabbed for it as Maebe tore herself free, ripping the bottle green fabric of her cloak. They started to run as soon as they had both recovered. The jumboar was unsteadily descending behind them, a giant bulk that crushed trees, spiny plants clinging to its coarse, dark hair. "Let's split and circle back. We can lose it," Maebe panted through clenched teeth. "Don't be stupid. We'll just lose each other. I don't know these woods well. Do you?" It wasn't a question. They had to stick together, not only to escape the jumboar, but to find their way back to Clest. The slope they tumbled down was far too steep to climb back up. As soon as that realization hit Maebe, so did Mouse. He shoved her hard, sending her hurtling to one side. She screeched as her bleeding hands collided with the twigs and stones of the decaying forest ground. Mouse whirled blade high as he slashed at the boar that had come upon them too quickly. He cut through its snout, enraging it, trying to get it to charge after him. It didn't, though. It turned back to Maebe, struggling to get up from the floor, still regaining her senses from the force of Mouse's push. She saw Mouse lunge for it again, this time slicing deep into its rear flank. The great beast roared in pain, a sound that echoed through the forest valley. Flecks of grey spittle flying out from between its grinding teeth. But still it charged for Maebe. Mouse knew what it was after before she did. "Throw your pack!" he screamed at her, across the gap filled with the hulking mass of the jumbo. Uncomprehending, but with no ideas of her own, Maebe ripped the bag from her shoulder and threw it as hard as she could, muscles screaming with the force she used. The jumbo charged past her, close enough for the stench of the beast to fill her nostrils. Her bag had caught on a low-hanging branch. The boar frantically nudged at it, until what was left of lunch fell onto the floor. Mouse gave an urgent motioning gesture, as the shock that she wasn't being trampled or gored quickly passed. She stumbled towards him, quietly escaping the feasting boar before they bolted into the woods together. They stopped once they were both panting, poised and listening for any sound of the boar trailing behind them. "Lunch," Maebe wheezed with sadness, after a few moments of silence. Mouse shushed her and bit back on his laugh. Neither of them knew where they had ended up during their frenzied escape. The only option for finding a way back would be to climb higher, to look down on the valleys for a path which led back to Clest. Or if they were lucky, the ocean might come into sight. Maebe gazed at the afternoon sun. "It's going to be dark in a few hours." She stopped and watched Mouse, leaning against a rock just ahead of her, peering up at him through long lashes. "I guess you won't be making a good impression with the Guild." Mouse turned back to her with a beautiful grin. "I've never made a good impression in my life, May." They both stifled a laugh. Mouse held out a hand to help Maebe climb up the uneven ledge before her. "Is it right that I feel worse about letting down a grumpy goat herder than I do about letting down a grumpy wizard?" Mouse questioned as they continued up the slope. "That's because Ahilor will be fine. He'll find something to keep him busy. I think it makes you a good prince," Maebe said. "Can we find a place to camp soon? I don't want to be wandering around in the dark with a jumbo around." "You make it sound bad. At least you're in the company of a wonderful, handsome prince," he boasted. He flicked his hair out, posing with his leg on a tree stump, and flashed a most charming grin. "That's not what I said," Maebe huffed, pushing his knee out the way and striding past him. "Oh, I read between the lines." He winked and trailed after her.